I'm Master Sergeant retired Randy McElwee. I spent 23 years in Army Special Forces, and my primary focus while I was in the military with Army Special Forces, I spent a lot of time with doing desert mobility operations, which included use of the motorcycles and some tactical exploration of how to employ the bikes, how to use them for different scenarios, and how we could incorporate them into a lot of the missions that we were doing. I spent my time in Army Special Forces, and then the last operational assignment I had, I was in charge of our Special Projects Division, which is like our plainclothes section. And after the unit's involvement in Afghanistan, I got my choice of assignments, and I came to finish up at the University of Georgia, working at the Military Science Department. And now, together with my son, we run a jiu-jitsu academy, and I am the director of Going Commando, which is my company that works with doing business and personal success coaching for people that want to apply military principles to their business and personal life without having to commit to actually spending all that time in the military.
Maybe let's talk about the types of bikes that you rode in training, and which your favorite what were.
Okay, so primarily we wound up with the Kawasaki 4-stroke, the 250s. We tried some different ones, some Hondas, experimented initially with 2-stroke versus 4-stroke, discovered the 4-stroke, even though it didn't have the power snap of the 2-stroke engines, it was much quieter, which worked better, especially for any type of reconnaissance missions, and finally settled on the Kawasaki's as the primary bike that we had for all the guys on that particular, for the desert mobility. And throughout my military time, we worked with a lot of other units that were using different motorcycles for different purposes. The Air Force used some actually really small little mini bikes for runway clearing. It was kind of comical. The Air Force guys looked like kind of like they were part of the circus with a big guy on a little small bike like one of the clowns. The Rangers used the bikes also, but for us in the primarily desert mobility theater, it turned out to be the 4-stroke Kawasaki's.
And then you talked too about, hold on, this is a little crooked. You talked too about the 4 strokes and can you talk a little bit about the noise and about between the 4 strokes and the 2 strokes, and could you talk about that?
So yeah, obviously the 2 strokes were, they had the power. They could really, accelerate much more quickly, had a really rapid burst of power, but just the sound carried a lot further. And so the 4 strokes were much better, even primarily like at night when it's very quiet in the desert. Unless you're really, laying on the throttle, they were pretty quiet. So that was pretty key for us, especially to do reconnaissance and not be, identified or recognized throughout what we were doing. It was important that speed, was sacrificed for some of the stealth.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that last bit, just so I can get it without the phone?
Which part? So.
About this, you didn't want to sacrifice speed for the stealth.
So it really became much more important for us to give up that extra power that we had with the 2 strokes and the speed, the rapid acceleration for the quiet and the stealth, so that we weren't discovered, since we were primarily focused on reconnaissance type missions in the desert.
Let me back this up a little bit.
You're saying I'm fat? You need the wide angle lens?
Yeah. No, but I put it high so I can get that, but then I'm like topping you a little awkwardly.
Okay.
Find a balance. Can you talk about kind of the problems, also advantages? I thought it was cool how you were talking about the weapons on the bikes, So maybe we'll start there, talk
Okay.
about weapons on the bikes, and then I'll get into like pros and cons of using a bike.
Yep. So we had a lot of challenges with the motorcycles, and one of the big challenges initially was whenever we were using the bikes, they didn't have a lot of the weapon systems that we were able to integrate onto the other vehicles. You know, primarily the modified Humvees, the ground mobility vehicles that we use for desert operations. And initially, we even had a different vehicle called the Fast, you know, the FSV, the Fast FAV, excuse me, Fast Attack Vehicle, which is kind of a dune buggy with machine guns mounted on it. But the challenge with the motorcycle was there was no place to effectively mount, you know, a consistent weapon system. So we had to make sure we had weapons with us. So we tried a couple of different options. We used some of the cases that people use for hunting to try to, you know, that were on the bike themselves, that we would put the weapon in order to carry it. And one of the things we found, one of the problems that came from that is every now and then if you had an accident or dumped the bike, you could bend the weapon and ruin a whole weapon system. So we kind of, you know, determined that the only answer was for the rider to have the weapon slung on his body. And initially, one of the things that we did, because we were focused on desert operations, is we were using the M16A2 rifles, which is a longer barreled rifle, which was much more awkward on the bikes to try to, you know, ride with it strapped across your body. And so we worked towards trying to get the shorter M4s or use other weapon systems like MP5s and things like that in order to have our riders that were out ahead doing reconnaissance with the bikes to have, you know, the advantage of having a weapon system with them. And then we ran into some other challenges as well with the bikes. We had different, one of the other key things for us was to be able to use the motorcycles with night vision goggles. And so when we were, you know, trying and experimenting with how to employ night vision goggles with the bikes, we ran into a lot of issues initially because of the depth perception of the early generation night vision, and we couldn't tell the difference between a tire track and a ditch, you know, a rut in the road, which sometimes caused guys to dump the bikes and have accidents and things like that. And then we further ran into challenges with trying to integrate, you know, with the bikes to have effective communication. So we needed methods to, you know, first navigate on the bikes. We actually started stealing some things, some ideas from the aviation guys. We started using these knee boards that would, you know, strap to your legs so that we could have the map available on our body and refer to it quickly without having to stop, pull out a whole map, unfold it. And then another challenge we had initially was being able to communicate, because it was important that while we were out ahead of an element doing reconnaissance for the main element of vehicles, that we were able to contact them anytime we saw something and you know, notify them in our situation. With that, we couldn't always, you know, with the helmets, we didn't have an effective way because the helmets weren't integrated with the tactical systems, so the Kevlar helmet wasn't effective for that. And we had to find ways to integrate the communication systems to plug directly into military radios. So we started, you know, experimenting with different things. We you know, initially started using aviation helmets so that we would have a way to plug directly into the communication systems and be able to use our military radios and talk, you know, back to the main element of vehicles. And then even later we went to like a lighter variation of helmets that we got from the Air Force fighter pilots in order to be more effective as well, but have that ability to communicate. And that became especially more important later as we were working with one of the special mission units and started to integrate the use of Little Bird helicopters to provide air support for us as a reconnaissance unit. And you know, we were primarily looking to do that as a scud hunting operation as part of our special reconnaissance with a mounted vehicle patrol using the bikes. And we needed a way to have air support in case we got into trouble ran into enemy contact, or in case we actually, came upon a Scud element or a Scud mobility vehicle that was a launcher, so we could interdict that target right away using communication, and that gave us a direct line to these Little Bird helicopters with miniguns and 2.75 rocket, so they could actually engage those targets.
The helicopters that you showed me the clips of the bikes going in and out of, was that the Little Bird helicopter?
No, that's the MH-47, right? That's a large dual-bladed helicopter that's primarily for transport, and we would use those to get the vehicles into the operational area, especially to try to get behind enemy lines. We would load the Humvee or the GMV, the modified version of the Humvee, inside the helicopter, or with the footage that we were looking at, we would sling load it in or out of the area. And
sling load?
Yeah, the sling load was hanging suspended from those large ropes, and then it would fly in and then release it and put it on the ground and then land later, and allow us to come out first on the bikes and kind of do a quick perimeter search of the area to make sure there's no enemy in the area while the guys came out, got the vehicle ready, and then we would set up to operate behind the lines that way. So initially, we would either internally load or put the Humvee inside the CH-47s, the MH-47 aircraft. And when we did that, there was only about 1.5 inches of clearance on each side of the vehicle, so it was very tight. It would take a while to load them up, and the guys would have to practice to get really good at it. And then we could only put one vehicle per helicopter in, and then we still had room for a couple bikes in front of it. And we would use the bikes in conjunction with the GMV loaded inside the helicopter to get into the area, or to also have them pull us out after the mission was done.
That's cool. So if bikes were some of the first going out to see if there's enemy on land before everyone else came out, are they like the first to see the enemy? Like, how do you know the enemy's there? You see them or you get shot at?
Usually that's kind of the idea, is you don't usually see them, but once you get on the ground and the bikes go out, they're probably the first to get fired upon because they're the first contact. And so that was one of the reasons that the speed of the bike was very important. And even though we had to sacrifice that, with the two strokes, it would have been nice to have any extra speed you could, especially if you're going to get shot at. But the reconnaissance part was much more important. And most of the time, initially you would go in at night. That's why the use of the night vision was most important. And then, that's why the bikes would go out first, see if they drew fire. And then that way you could get everybody back on the helicopter and leave. And then, it would be kind of the initial interaction if there was enemy there to let you know. But, the goal was to get everybody out, get them established, and then move out away from where the helicopter had landed so that people aren't aware that you might be in that area.
That's freaky. Can you turn that gray helmet yeah. For a second it was looking like almost like a bowling ball. Now it looks like a helmet again.
Same kind of shape.
Yeah. It looks like a helmet again. Perfect. Okay. The last bike-related point, anyways, that I want to make sure we talk about was how you talked about the movement. Now you said that it's going to four-wheelers, and so if you can explain about that.
Right.
And then what you think about that. If that's a good idea or bad idea, or what.
So there's obviously some pros and cons to the bikes. The bikes are very, very mobile, very fast, quite agile as a vehicle. The downside is the bikes, take a little bit more skill to operate. So it takes extra time, extra training for guys that are going to be on the bikes to effectively employ them without having accidents. Even with that, people go down all the time, especially when you're trying to ride at night with the night vision. And so, there were some injuries that resulted from some of that training and some of that use of the bikes. And a lot of people, you know, felt that, hey, they're just too dangerous, because the last thing you want is to, you know, have a guy that you've spent 2 years of high level training and a lot of money on to have a motorcycle accident, even in training, and, you know, break a leg or something and be out, you know, not be mission deployable, mission ready as a result. So the change kind of switched over, and a lot of that happened during the initial operations in Afghanistan, was to switch over to the use of four-wheelers. The four-wheelers, you know, are a little more stable. The guys were able to get on them and use them with much less training. They're still pretty good as far as being able to get to all the places. They don't quite have, you know, the ability of the motorcycles to get into, you know, the same hard to reach places with a trained rider, but you got to have the trained rider. And so the switch went from focus on training for the rider of the bike to being able to use that training time for other skills that are needed to engage the enemy. And the trade-off, the natural trade-off, was to use the four-wheelers instead. And, you know, pros and cons, I personally love the bikes, but, you know, I got into it initially because when I was in high school before joining the military, I rode motocross. So that was, you know, an area for me that the bikes just felt very comfortable, and I really enjoyed it as a result. But, you know, for guys that didn't have training, and we did spend a lot of time trying to train guys to be able to use, you know, the bikes effectively and be able to ride them with night vision and things like that. So I could see where, you know, it's just easier to use the four-wheelers. Do you give up some things? But if the skill's not there, it's just not as useful.
What do you think they should do as far as those vehicles? Should they spend the money and go to dirt bikes, or should they go four-wheelers or electric bikes? That's like a new thing.
I'm not familiar with the electric bikes. I think that would still pose the same problem as far as being able to, you know, have the skill to ride, and you know, because it comes down to an issue of balance, and, you know, there's some athleticism involved in being able to do that, and really it just takes some experience. The four-wheeler is the easy answer, and I think that's probably going to stay how it is, because now, you know, there's the four-wheelers, there's the side-by-sides that people are using. There's just a lot more vehicle options to do those types of rough terrain work and to move guys. Not to mention with the four-wheeler and the you know, the side-by-sides, there's the ability to carry more equipment, which is kind of a you know, guiding necessity for the troops these days. The guys over the years, there's just so much more equipment to carry, and it keeps adding on, that it's pretty impractical to try to have that on the bike. And that was one of the disadvantages. We couldn't always effectively carry like our initial load of gear to be out on the bikes. We would leave some of our gear with the vehicle and then, you know, just take what we needed on the bike. So that definitely a disadvantage there. I think the four-wheelers, you know, and not having, you know, been on active duty lately and played with them, I can't say what's better, but I can see the definite advantage and benefit of the four-wheelers versus the bikes. But I miss the bikes.
My timestamps. There was something you said that I wanted.
Must have been a lie.
No, that I wanted to ask about.
Okay.
No, I can't remember what it was. Why you got into bikes? Oh yeah. So, can you talk about the story of you getting into bikes, both personal and then the military?
So personally, I grew up riding motorcycles, always loved them. And, you know, as soon as I could, I got interested in motocross and raced motocross, you know, during my teenage time up until I went into the military, and just, you know, something I always loved and enjoyed. And then once I got in the military, my first tour, you know, initially I was a little bit disgruntled, and that was primarily because I was so young. There wasn't a lot of things, especially, being a young guy in Army Special Forces, that, I went in and I thought, hey, I'm a Green Beret. I'm ready for all the action right now, any minute. I want it. But it doesn't work that way. You got to prove yourself. You got to spend some time there. So initially, I actually developed a list of all the reasons I was going to get out of the Army. I used to carry it around with me on my first tour. And then at one point, one of my sergeant majors, while I was still early in my career, sent me to Fort Bliss, Texas. We used to have a unit out there, an element that focused on desert training and desert concepts called the B500 project. And this B500 project is where I got introduced to using the military vehicles. At the time, we still had the old FAVs, the fast attack vehicle, dune buggies, and the bikes were there. And so I got started and introduced to them there. And it actually kind of got me all excited because I felt like I was finally doing the real cool Army Special Forces stuff as a Green Beret that I had signed up for. So with that, I kind of got the bug, and next thing you know, I wound up staying for 23 years in the Army. So, got to be careful of the bike addiction. It'll get you.
I think that's great, Randy. That's all I had for bike.
That's it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Bike stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing else to talk about on the bikes?
Let me think. Anything else? The clips we showed. You know what? Let me actually pull up the training that I did, those bullet points, and I'll see if maybe you have any. I can think of any questions I can ask about that.
Okay.
Since I still got a little time left with you. Do they like each other? You think so? Or they're not dating?
I hope so. No, they're not. I hope so.
You think so?
They each have a boyfriend and a girlfriend.
Okay. You know what I might do? I might read off my outline that I did, and then if you think of anything from there that jogs anything that you think you could add, that could be good.
We can do that.
Because some of these things I also don't know what I don't know,
Right.
I don't
Okay.
know what to ask. Okay, so in the training that they had me do, so it was a professional motocross racer. He trains the Marines for 2 weeks on dirt bikes.
Okay.
Right now, for the past 3 years, he's been training them on electric motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
So they look like little dirt bikes, but they're electric. So the range is 150 miles. There's no oil. They're quiet. They're super quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so he basically teaches them dirt. So he teaches them the basics. Some of them had no riding experience at all.
And we ran into the same thing. Like some of our guys that come to the team or involved would have no riding experience whatsoever. And part of the mission for that detachment that was out in El Paso at Fort Bliss was to provide training for other parts of the group, so that that training would spread out. And at one point later, when I was on a desert mobility team, one of the things that we did was develop training programs, and I spent a lot of time working on the training program for the bikes. And it started off with just basic, riding skills, and then learning, how to adapt that to the environment, progressing to, okay, riding off-road, riding at night with night vision, getting on and off the helicopters, doing those different things. So yeah, the training package has always been like a key part of that. And we also went out and got some of the professional riders that would do some of the, like long distance desert events, and some of the motocross riders and stuff to provide us training. And then we came back and established our own training programs to make it fit more of what we were doing, with the mission sets.
Oh, and then, this is a little detail, but I got it upstairs, but not now. So getting on and off the helicopter.
Yes.
In the video had ramps, but you also explained that sometimes you got off without the ramps. Can you explain about that?
Yeah, so the tailgate of the helicopter has these fold-out ramps that allow you to, especially if you need to put a vehicle on it, and sometimes just for the troops to walk on, especially if they're carrying a lot of gear, that they have those, they're built into the tailgate, they're removable, but they're usually there and you can fold them up or fold them down. It only takes a second to really fold them down, but sometimes we wanted that extra second, and we would just talk to the crew chiefs of the helicopters and tell them, hey, when we land to get off the bird, don't put them down, just step out of the way. And since it's just a small drop, it's probably, it might be 2 to 3 feet max. With the bikes, it's easy enough to ride off the end of the ramp onto the ground. Coming back on is another thing. They're high enough that it would cause a problem and maybe even cause, somebody to dump the bike just as you're trying to leave. So we would always try to make sure they had the ramps down for us whenever we're getting back on the helicopters.
That'll be good. So we also talked about too in the training, getting out of ruts and train tracks, like you had mentioned. Practice riding in sand.
Yeah, that was a big one for us, was the sand and gravel, especially this deep sand, because it's very different. And if you've done a little bit of off-road riding, you do it, out here in the east where you're dealing with the normal terrain, then you get out into the desert and you hit like an area of soft sand or whatever. It's pretty big difference. So it was kind of important to spend some time on that and go over, for the guys to get some experience in actually doing that.
They also would train 2-up riding. So riding with someone on the back, like the sniper that I guess you would just drop off. Or also someone, if they were fallen and unconscious, draped over in the front. Right.
So I don't think we ever put any effort into the unconscious person. One of the things we used to do, though, is we would do, down rider drills to where one of the bikes would go down and then you would have to take the other rider with you and move back to the main vehicle element. So that was definitely something that had to be covered. And then...
Wait, can you backtrack a bit?
Yes.
When you said you would take the other rider with you.
Yeah, so... Yes, so we put the other rider on the back in order to get out of the area because, maybe his bike had crashed and you're under fire or you needed to evacuate the area. For any reason that you only had one operational bike to leave that location. And for the most part, we didn't spend a lot of time, doing multiple riders, but we did cover that as well as part of the contingencies whenever there's a problem.
And then we did the helicopter disembarking simulation out of a, what was it?
You used a Connex.
Huh?
Yeah, shipping container, a Connex. We call it a Connex.
Oh, you call it a Connex.
Yeah, that's the military term.
Oh.
Used to be. I don't. But yeah, it's a shipping container.
I'll write that timestamp down too. Shipping container, aka Connex.
And so with a lot of these things, whenever we came up with these requirements for potential missions, just like you were doing with the Connex, we had to come up with ways to practice them first. And so sometimes, initially we would practice them with the helicopter just sitting there going on and off to find, some of the potential problems, some of the adjustments we needed to make. And then like you saw in the one video is we would spend an entire day, just going through it, time and time again to make sure we had all the little issues figured out. And even then, there's always something that could happen that you didn't figure or calculate. And so the goal was to make sure that we'd practiced enough in order to be able to improvise whenever something went wrong.
We didn't do anything for training, but we did talk about like also need to ride at night with night vision goggles, and then also one of the guys was talking about riding through oil fires where you couldn't see like 2 feet in front of you. Did you experience that?
We didn't spend any actual time on any kind of oil fires. Most of our focus was twofold. We were kind of a little bit more focused on like reconnaissance and not being discovered. We spent a lot of time working with how to use the camouflage nets and other items in order to hide the bikes and hide our position. And then also later when we integrated for use with the Little Bird helicopters to call in airstrikes from them and use air support, that was more of the attack mode, is to kind of guide the attack and direct it from the bike instead of being directly engaged. Another disadvantage of the bike is it doesn't provide much protection, especially for the rider. So we really tried to focus on avoiding engagement.
You know what I'll do? I'll put on the screen that one picture you were showing me with the rocks, and you're like, there are 3 vehicles there. So can you talk about that? Like, just if you just pretend to know that I'm going to put it on the screen when you're talking about
Right. So if you look at the picture, one of the things you'll notice is using the camouflage nettings, we take the terrain, the shape of the terrain and how things are, and we use that to just kind of to cover the vehicle. We want to break up the outline. We want to, conceal it with a similar coloring. And most of all, we want to create a shape so that it doesn't appear that there's anything there, especially with the vehicles, because the Humvees and the modified GMV have these very square edges, and that looks very unnatural in nature. So we would use the positioning in order to make sure we would conceal the vehicles. And if you look at the picture, you have to look very closely to even see where the netting is, and then you have to actually kind of know what you're looking for. Probably the best way to find it is if a helicopter flies over close and you actually see the netting move from the air of the blades of the helicopter, but you have to get so close already to recognize it. You'd be surprised like how often that, even during training, we would have people that were working as enemy to try to discover us would walk within real close proximity of those positions and not see it.
That's cool. Okay. That's all I got for the bike stuff. That's it. Thank you, Randy.
You're welcome. I hope that's what you had in mind.
That was so cool. This is awesome. Now, can I talk to you for another 16 hours? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, whatever you want. Whatever you want to discuss, that's why we're here.
It is done. I just got 3 minutes until that thing upstairs runs out.
Okay.
So I can go check on that now. See if your group is still running.